They tore down my dock in broad daylight. I had barely settled into my new home when the HOA president showed up with a professional demolition crew and reduced my 25-year-old dock to splinters without so much as a warning. But here's the twist. Just minutes later, she was on her knees, pleading with me not to call the police. Why? Because a county inspector had just caught her in the act of committing a felony. What began as petty neighborhood harassment ended up becoming the largest property fraud bust in Texas history. And it all started with one woman's greed and my refusal to let it slide. I had felt so lucky that morning, pulling up to my new lakefront home in Lakewood Community, Texas. After losing my wife, Amanda, to cancer last year, I used her life insurance payout to buy a modest 2-bedroom place with a breathtaking view of the water. The realtor mentioned it came with a dock, but I wasn't prepared for how perfect it would be. Solid, weathered pine built with real craftsmanship. With coffee in hand, I stood on the shoreline, watching the morning light ripple across the lake. For the first time in months, I thought I might finally find peace here. The moving crew was just wrapping up when I wandered down to inspect the dock more closely. Every plank was sturdy, the railings still solid after decades. At the far end was a little storage compartment ideal for my fishing gear. The previous owner, Mrs. Patterson, had clearly adored this spot. Her son told me she spent every morning out here with her coffee. Just as I planned to, I was imagining my own quiet mornings when a sharp, no-nonsense voice behind me cut through the calm. "You Josh Miller?" I turned to see a woman in her early 50s striding toward me, clipboard in hand, dressed in designer clothes that didn't belong anywhere near a dock. Behind her was something I couldn't quite process: our full demolition crew, complete with a bulldozer. Not a neighbor with a power tool, not a couple of workers with hammers. A full-scale, professional operation. "I'm Karen Sterling," she announced, skipping the handshake. "HOA president." "This dock's illegal. Demolition starts now." I stared at her, stunned. "Ma'am, I just moved in. The dock came with the house. It's been here for decades." "What do you mean, illegal?" Karen didn't care. She waved the bulldozer forward. "Emergency safety violation. Immediate hazard to the community. HOA has full authority to remove dangerous structures." My hand shook as I called 911, but the dispatcher's words chilled me even more. If it was HOA emergency authority, it was considered a civil matter. They couldn't intervene. Karen overheard and smirked like she'd played this game before. The engine roared, and I watched helplessly as my dock began to fall apart under the machine's force. Amanda used to tell me, "Bullies count on good people feeling powerless." Standing there, I understood exactly what she meant. Still, I kept filming. And that's when I noticed something odd. Karen wasn't just supervising, she was rifling through the debris as if searching for something. Even the crew looked puzzled, exchanging uneasy glances as she got her designer clothes dirty. Then a white county truck pulled up. Out stepped Inspector Tom Rodriguez, clipboard in hand, surveying the scene with confusion. "Ma'am," he called to Karen, "why are you demolishing a legal structure?" The color drained from her face. Rodriguez inspected what was left of the dock, checked his records, and said the magic words, "This dock was permitted in 1999. All inspections passed. This is destruction of legal property. The owner can press criminal charges." Karen's tears appeared instantly. "Oh God, I made a terrible mistake. Please don't call the police." But I could see Ida, she wasn't sorry. She'd known exactly what she was doing until she got caught. When Rodriguez asked for her demolition permit, her voice cracked. "It was a broken bar, an emergency. Please don't report this." The crew exchanged uneasy looks, clearly wanting no part in her mess. Neighbors began gathering, recording her meltdown. She dropped to her knees, begging and offering to pay for the damage, claiming she had children. Rodriguez shook his head. "No emergency justifies unpermitted demolition. This is criminal property damage." As Karen drove away sobbing, my elderly neighbor, Betty Stone, walked up. Her first words froze me in place. "Josh, that woman has been a..." Betty's first words hit me like a gut punch. Karen had been watching my house for weeks, tracking my every move. She knew exactly when I'd arrive. The morning after the demolition, I stood there staring at what was left of my dock of $15,000 worth of destruction while Betty handed me a cup of coffee and the truth. What she told me turned my stomach. This wasn't some overzealous HOA president making innocent mistakes. This was a calculated, months-long setup. "Karen's been telling people for months your lot would be on the market soon," Betty said, her withered hands trembling around her mug. "She's had a buyer lined up since spring, bragging about the commission she'd make." "Josh, that woman's been counting your money before you even unpacked." The puzzle pieces fell into place as Betty laid it all out. Karen wasn't just the HOA president, she was also a real estate agent for Morrison Properties, the largest firm in 3 counties. Her scheme was as simple as it was vile. Step Honia manufacture costly violations to pressure homeowners. Step Ta appear as the helpful problem solver, offering a quick cash buyer who'd take the property as is. Step 3 collect a fat commission when the sale went through, on an $800,000 lakefront home. That meant about $48,000 straight into her pocket. Betty had been quietly tracking her behavior for 2 years. She rattled off names: the Hendersons on Maple Street forced to sell after $60,000 in supposed repairs. The Martinez family on Pine Avenue driven out when Karen declared their deco hazard. All 3 properties, waterfront, all sold through Morrison Properties. And each one had Karen's fingerprints all over the deal. She targets widowers, retirees, anyone who might not have the strength for a long legal fight, Betty said, her voice tight with anger. Then came the part that made my blood boil. Karen had researched me specifically. She knew about Amanda's cancer, the medical bills, the life insurance payout I'd used to buy the house. She dug through public records, confident I couldn't handle both massive repair costs and a legal battle. Her timeline was coldly precise: hit me with violations, let the stress build, then swoop in with her solution: a developer friend who paid cash for distressed properties. That afternoon, she knocked on my door, settlement offer in hand. $20,000 for the dock replacement and no lawyers, just a misunderstanding between neighbors. She was dressed to perfection again, playing the part of the remorseful community leader. "I feel just terrible about yesterday," she said sweetly. But her eyes told the real story: calculating, cold, already counting her commission. When I mentioned maybe getting estimates for repairs, she pounced. "Actually, my friend at Lakeside Luxury Homes might be interested in buying your whole property. Save you the trouble of dealing with contractors." My internal alarms went off immediately. How did she know I might even consider selling, and why push this specific buyer so hard? So, I acted the part of the overwhelmed, Matilda Macaron v. widower. "That's awfully generous, Karen. I'll think about it." Inside, I was seething. Amanda always said, "Give a liar enough rope, and they'll hang themselves." And sure enough, Karen kept talking, practically giddy as she revealed her friend was actually her brother-in-law, Michael Sterling, owner of Lakeside Luxury Homes. He specialized in quick closings for people in tough spots. Now it all made sense. This wasn't just her scam, it was a family business. She created the problem, he solved it, and together they split the profits while leaving families uprooted. That night, I dug into Lakeside Luxury Homes online. What I found made me sick. Every single one of Karen's past targets had sold to Michael's company for a fraction of market value, only for the properties to be flipped to developers within months. The next morning, she escalated her campaign. Suddenly, my mailbox was improperly placed at a fine, my lawn was half an inch too tall a fine, an old garden gnome left by the previous owner, another fine. She strutted around my yard in designer clothes, crouching with a tape measure, snapping photos of the most ridiculous infractions you could imagine. I started taking pictures of her doing it, documenting her pettiness in full display. Every citation came with steep penalties and threats of placing a lien on my home if I didn't pay within 72 hours. That's when I made my decision. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd fight her with the one thing she hadn't expected me to use: real evidence. Being a carpenter for 3 decades trains you to notice the smallest details, and spending years married to Amanda, who worked in property management, meant I'd picked up more than a few lessons about real estate law. That night, I headed to the county courthouse and dug into public records. What I uncovered blew the entire situation wide open. 6 months before I ever bought the property, Karen had filed a pre-development inquiry on my lot. The date was there in black and white. She had her sights on my land before I even signed the closing papers. That alone was infuriating. But deeper in the documents was something that made my skin crawl. Somehow, Karen had gained access to private financial information, of things no HOA president should ever see. She knew about my insurance payout, my credit history, even the medical debt from Amanda's treatments. She had researched me like a predator studying prey, identifying every weakness she could exploit. Her strategy became painfully clear. She'd seen that I paid cash for the house, which told her I had assets but not necessarily the resources for a drawn-out legal fight. I was exactly her type of target, a recent widower, new in town, emotionally drained and financially vulnerable after medical expenses. In her mind, I was the perfect mark as someone who would fold quickly and accept her solution with gratitude. The sequence was chillingly precise. Demolish the dock on my moving day, bury me under daily fines, then send in her brother-in-law Michael with a generous offer to buy me out. The following morning, Karen cranked her harassment into overdrive. My grass was suddenly half an inch too tall, a $200 fine. The paint on my mailbox, slightly chippy, a $150 fine. And the kicker, an unapproved garden gnome Mrs. Patterson had left behind, a $300 fine. But this time, she made her first real blunder. She issued the fines without the required sign-off from 2 board members, a rule clearly written in the HOA covenants. I'd read that document cover to cover after her first stunt, and now I knew she was cutting corners. So, I documented everything, of photos, timestamps, the works. From my porch, I watched this 50-something real estate agent in designer clothes crouching in my yard with a ruler, measuring blades of grass to the millimeter. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, shaking their heads. Karen was too blinded by greed to notice how absurd she looked. The beauty of her petty citations was that they revealed her real character. Fining someone over grass height, bird feeder placement, or welcome mad colors isn't about protecting property value, it's about control. And the neighborhood was beginning to see it. Betty told me other residents were quietly wondering if their homes might be next. I had my strategy. I would comply with every single violation immediately and perfectly, while recording every procedural slip she made. Grass cut to country club standards, receipts saved, mailbox repainted exactly to manufacturer specs, photos taken. Every time she tried to paint me as uncooperative, my paper trail would prove the opposite. By the time the emergency home meeting rolled around, my trap was set. The community center was packed, the air thick with curiosity. Karen came armed with a polished presentation, a slideshow and olive full of blown-up photos of my so-called violations. For the first few minutes, she had people nodding along, portraying me as a troublemaker threatening the community's image. Then I asked a single question that turned the room on its head. Karen, when did you first contact developers about my property? The room went still. Her confident smile faltered. Yeah, broken bar, what do you mean? She stammered. That's when I held up the county records of proof she'd reached out to developers 6 months before I moved in. According to these documents, you were shopping my property around before a single violation notice was issued. Care to explain that? Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The illusion of her being a devoted community leader shattered. That's just routine research, she tried, her voice cracking. But when I added that she'd somehow accessed my private financial records, including medical data, several neighbors audibly reacted in shock. This wasn't just harassment, it was stalking, possibly even identity theft. Karen unraveled instantly. And when liars are cornered, they usually either retreat or go on the attack. Karen chose the latter. Karen tried to spin the meeting in her favor, painting herself as the champion of the neighborhood, constantly dealing with problem residents who didn't understand what it took to preserve property values. But the more she talked, the more she exposed herself. I work tirelessly to protect this community, she declared. I look into every new resident to make sure they're a good fit. I have strong relationships with developers who can step in when there's an issue. Every word was another brick in the wall of evidence against her, a self-confession of her manipulative and predatory methods. By the end, she was visibly rattled. She stormed out of the room, throwing threats of legal action over her shoulder. But everyone could see her bravado was paper thin. The mask had slipped. As she reached her car, something caught my attention. She pulled out her phone and immediately made a call. Even from across the parking lot, I could see her hands trembling. She wasn't calling in confidencia, she was calling in fear. And the way she kept glancing over her shoulder told me something important. Karen Sterling might not be the apex predator here. She could be answering to someone even worse. That thought stuck with me through the night. By Friday, I couldn't sleep. Her panicked phone call kept replaying in my head. I got my answer early the next morning. At 6 a.m., my doorbell started ringing non-stop. I stepped outside to find 4 different county inspection trucks lined up on my street. The fire department had arrived over an anonymous report of a gas leak. The health department was there for a supposed sewage odor. Police claimed they'd been called for loud music, and code enforcement was responding to suspicious activity. Karen had weaponized every branch of local government against me overnight. It was both infuriating and eye-opening. Every report had come from a concerned citizen, filed anonymously, but they were clearly from the same source. The fire chief admitted it was the 3rd false alarm from the neighborhood in a month. The health inspector sheepishly confirmed there was no trace of any odor. But Karen's plan backfired. I invited each inspector in, offered coffee, and laid out the evidence of what was going on. They weren't strangers to this type of abuse. Several admitted they'd been getting a wave of similar calls in the area, all targeting elderly residents, newcomers, and people unfamiliar with their rights. Most folks just pay the fines and move away. The code enforcement officer told me quietly, "Good for you for fighting it." That gave me hope. Sunday morning, Karen escalated again, this time showing up on my doorstep with a lawyer. She accused me of harassing her, both personally and professionally. The irony was almost laughable. Her attorney listened politely until I handed him my file. County records showing she'd approached developers about my lot before I moved in. Photos of her measuring my lawn. Time-stamped copies of every bogus citation. It was plain who was the aggressor. "Ma'am," the lawyer said evenly, "you destroyed his legally permitted dock. He could sue you for property damage, harassment, and possibly conspiracy with your brother-in-law's development firm. If you're smart, you'll stop now." Her face drained of color, but instead of quitting, she went on the attack, insisting I was posting lies about her online. I hadn't posted a single word anywhere. Her paranoia was beginning to show. By Monday, she made her most desperate play yet, calling for an emergency HOA vote to expel me from the community entirely. The other board members didn't bite. Dr. Peterson flatly told her, "Karen, this has gone too far. He hasn't broken any rules, and you're making the HOA look bad." Tuesday morning, she made her fatal mistake. I was drinking coffee on my temporary deck when I spotted her on my property, taping up violation notices without permission or authority. What she didn't know was that I'd installed security cameras over the weekend. They caught everything in perfect clarity. The footage showed her muttering to herself, gesturing wildly, and even kicking my garden hose because it wasn't properly coiled. It was harassment on full display, a personal vendetta, not professional enforcement. When I turned the video over to Officer Johnson, he didn't hesitate. "Sir, this is clear trespassing and harassment," he said. Apparently, I wasn't alone. 3 other families had recently filed similar reports against her. The police had already been quietly building a case. But then, as Johnson reviewed the footage, he noticed something I had missed: a broken bar. When Officer Johnson reviewed the footage, I expected him to focus on Karen marching around my property like she owned it. But halfway through, he froze the video and pointed at the corner of the screen. "See a broken bar? Do you know there's someone else watching your house?" In the shadow of an old oak at the edge of my lot, a figure was half hidden, barely visibly but definitely watching. Even through the grain, you could see the way they shifted their weight, like they were ready to move if needed. The body language wasn't friendly. Johnson zoomed in, his expression tightening. Whoever this is, they weren't just passing by. And from the timing, a broken bar looks like they were working with Miss Sterling. This might be bigger than just one neighbor with a grudge. A cold, heavy realization sank in. Karen hadn't been acting alone. Someone else had been pulling the strings, keeping an eye on me from the sideline as someone with more to lose than a real estate commission. Suddenly, that frantic phone call she made after the whole meeting clicked into place. She wasn't venting a broken bar, she was reporting to a boss. By Tuesday afternoon, Johnson had called in Detective Martinez to go over the footage. I thought we were still talking about trespassing and harassment. I couldn't have been more wrong. She watched the video once, then turned to me with a look that was all business. Mr. Milra Brokenbar, we've been tracking a property fraud ring operating across 3 counties for 2 years. Thesa, she tapped the frozen frame of the mystery figure. It could be the break we've been waiting for. Just like that, my little dock dispute had become part of a major criminal investigation. Karen Sterling wasn't simply a power-hungry HOA president, as she was a cog in a machine. The network Detective Martinez described included corrupt county officials, predatory agents, and developers who specialized in forcing people out of their homes through targeted harassment. My cameras had even caught her partner, a licensed private investigator, spying on me, mapping my routines, looking for weak points. These people had turned intimidation into a business model, and it was about to blow up in their faces. From the start, those rules should have been in place: every board meeting recorded and available for public viewing, monthly financial updates posted online, and any violation requiring written approval from at least 2 board members. Almost immediately, the fear that had once gripped our neighborhood disappeared. People realized they could speak freely without worrying about retaliation. But the most satisfying moment of all came when Karen stood in front of the entire community at the local center and delivered a public apology. The same woman who had destroyed my dock with unshakable arrogance now spoke in a low, trembling voice, unable to meet the eyes of the very neighbors she had bullied for years. Reading from a prepared note, she said, "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused to multiple families in this community." Everyone knew she wasn't truly sorry, only that she had been caught, but hearing her admit her actions out loud brought us the closure we needed. Karen's arrest became statewide news, sparking a wave of scrutiny toward HOA boards across Texas. Complaints of property fraud began to rise as victims found the courage to step forward, and lawmakers started talking about HOA reform. What began as one woman's greed had revealed deep flaws in community governance, issues that no one had been willing to confront until our fight forced them into the open. When Karen's replacement as HOA president, Betty Stone, asked if I wanted to take the role, she added quietly, "There's something about Karen you need to know, a broken bar, something she left behind." A month after Karen's resignation, I thought we were finally free of the nightmare. Betty was doing a fantastic job leading the HOA. The neighborhood was healing, and I was enjoying my morning coffee on the temporary deck while contractors rebuilt my dock. But after our first fully transparent HOA meeting, Betty pulled me aside and led me to the storage room at the community center. Behind dusty Christmas decorations were 3 boxes Karen had hidden before her arrest. Inside were financial records, property appraisals, and personal data on every resident. For 3 years, Karen had been compiling private details about families, medical information, employment history, even notes about family struggles, as though she were stalking prey. When I opened my own file, I found records of Amanda's exact cancer treatment costs, the life insurance money I'd used to buy my home, and surveillance notes detailing my daily routines. Karen had calculated that I'd break after 6 weeks of harassment, then be desperate enough to sell my home to her brother-in-law for 60% of its value. But the most unsettling discovery was what Betty called Karen's succession plan, a manual instructing others on how to continue her fraudulent schemes if she was ever removed. It detailed how to identify vulnerable homeowners, coordinate harassment campaigns, and split profits from forced sales. We hadn't just exposed a corrupt HOA president, we had uncovered an organized network operating in multiple communities. Detective Martinez was stunned when we turned over the files. "This is incredible," she said while photographing every page. "Most criminals try to hide their tracks, but she documented everything like it was a legitimate business." The evidence was enough to expand the investigation into a federal racketeering case that could put multiple people behind bars for decades. The files identified at least a dozen targeted families across 3 counties, 8 successful forced sales worth over $400,000, and a group of corrupt county employees who sold confidential financial information. Karen had even kept profit-sharing agreements, commission schedules, and performance reviews for her accomplices, as if she were running a corporation. As the story made national headlines, victims from other towns began coming forward with similar experiences: harassment, bogus violations, and forced sales to the same developers. Our case was now exposing a long-running property theft ring that had thrived for years. Legislators started drafting stronger HOA oversight laws, and I was invited to testify about property owners' rights. Karen's fall from power was swift. Her real estate license was revoked, her assets seized to repay victims, and she faced years in both state and federal prison. The powerful, untouchable figure who once ruled our neighborhood was now abandoned even by her own family, who testified against her to avoid prosecution. 6 months after my dock was destroyed, I stood on a brand new one watching the sunrise. The neighborhood, once tense and fearful, was thriving under Betty's honest leadership. Property values jumped by 15%, kids were playing outside again, and neighbors were talking like friends instead of suspects. Some victims even regained what they had lost. The Hendersons bought back their home when the developer was forced to sell during the investigation. Mrs. Martinez's family received enough settlement money to clear medical debt and stay in their house. Other families who had been driven away returned home. Justice wasn't just about punishing Karen, it was about restoring what was stolen. The fight had changed me too. Standing up to Karen gave me purpose again. After Amanda's death, I began advising communities across Texas, teaching them to spot and stop the tactics Karen had perfected. My research and organizing skills now helped others defend themselves against predatory HOAs and corrupt real estate schemes. The media attention brought interest from documentary filmmakers, legal experts, and researchers, but the most meaningful calls came from ordinary people enduring the same harassment, just looking for advice and encouragement. One caller told me, "You proved ordinary people can beat the system when they work together." 2 years later, our case inspired the Texas legislature to pass the Homeowner Protection Act, which required HOA financial transparency and made abuse of power a criminal offense. Property fraud complaints dropped across the state. And for me, peace had finally returned. Each morning, I sat on my dock with coffee, watching the sun rise over the lake, knowing our fight had protected not just my home but countless others. Amanda would have been proud. The dock she never saw had become a symbol of resistance that inspired people everywhere to stand up to injustice. Years after Karen bulldozed my dock, an email arrived. "I saw your story online and I need help. They're coming to my house tomorrow, and I just found out who's really behind it all." The fight for justice never truly ends, it just moves to the next place where it's needed. You know what surprised me most about the media frenzy around our case? It wasn't the headlines, the TV appearances, or even the legislative testimonies. It was the flood of messages from ordinary people saying our fight had given them the courage to stand up to their own neighborhood bullies. Sure, I'd spoken before lawmakers, been interviewed on national news, and helped produce a documentary called The Dock That Changed America. But the real impact showed in letters like the one from a grandmother in Arizona who stopped her HOA from foreclosing on her home using strategies she'd learned from our story. The difference between Karen's downfall and our community's revival couldn't have been starker. She lost everything at her house sold to cover legal bills, her career in ruins, her family ties shattered. Meanwhile, our property values jumped 20%. The streets felt safer, kids played without fear of random citations, and families who had once fled were returning to rebuild their lives. What began as my personal mission to protect a dock became a national symbol of standing up to institutional corruption. Law schools across the country now teach the Miller Doctrine as a blueprint for grassroots resistance against systemic fraud. 3 states have passed Karen's laws, mandating transparency and curbing HOA board abuse. Nationwide, real estate fraud complaints have dropped by nearly 40%, a proof that both victims and schemers were paying attention. 2 years after that bulldozer came roaring toward my dock, I'd found a purpose I never expected. The Fair Housing Defense Fund built from my settlement money has helped more than 300 families push back against harassment campaigns like ours. Most of these battles end quickly once the offenders realize their targets now have real legal firepower. And in the rare trials we fought, prosecutors used Karen's own playbook as evidence of organized fraud. For me, the biggest surprise wasn't the legal victory, it was the personal healing. Losing Amanda had left me hollow, but standing against Karen's bullying reminded me of who I was before the grief. It connected me to neighbors I might never have met, gave me a sense of belonging I thought I'd lost forever. The doc Amanda never saw is now the heart of our neighborhood. Birthdays, anniversaries, quiet evenings, and small victories over life's challenges are all celebrated there. Watching Betty Stone transform from a timid neighbor into a fearless HOA president has been nothing short of inspiring. Under her leadership, our meetings are recorded and shared publicly, financial records are updated monthly, and no violation is issued without written approval from at least 2 board members. Other associations have copied these practices nationwide. And the sweetest justice, Karen's One Secret Methods Manual, found in those hidden files, is now used by prosecutors to stop similar schemes before they can ruin more lives. Her story is taught in property law courses as a cautionary tale of how greed can turn community leadership into a criminal enterprise. Real estate professionals everywhere now know a misusing HOA power for personal gain can end in federal charges and career obliteration. 3 years after the dust settled, I ran into Karen at Dallas Airport. She was working at a small kiosk selling phone accessories. The woman who once ruled our neighborhood like a tyrant now wore a badge reading, Karen, a customer service associate. When she saw me, her face drained of color. "I'm sorry," she whispered when no one was listening. "I know it can't undo anything, but I truly am sorry for what I put you all through." This time, it felt real and not like the rehearsed apology at sentencing. "It does matter," I told her. "What you did was wrong, but you've paid the price. I hope you find peace." We spoke for less than 3 minutes, but it was the closure I hadn't realized I still needed. 5 years after that bulldozer changed everything. I wake up every morning in the home I fought to keep, surrounded by a community that's stronger than ever. The rebuilt dock now hosts fishing lessons for kids, quiet sunset dinners for couples, and occasional visits from documentary crews wanting to understand how one person's refusal to back down reshaped laws across America. The view at sunrise is breathtaking, the coffee tastes just right, and knowing our battle has protected countless families makes each morning worth celebrating. The newest email in my inbox reminds me the work is never really over. "Mr. Miller, I saw your documentary last night. My HOA president is doing exactly what Karen did to you. I don't know where to turn." I pour another cup of coffee, sit down at my desk, and start typing, because if I've learned anything, it's the bullies thrive on silence. And silence is the one thing I'll never give them.